Okay, Mr. Mack-Poole, let's have a look at the final part of the Soviet Union. Now, I'd just like to say, before we look at Mikhail Gorbachev in 1985 through to 1991, there are some important things to note, and that is that two other leaders, Andropov and Chernenko, they die. They don't live. They're both quite old when they're appointed Soviet premiers, and essentially their reigns aren't very long, and they don't do anything overly impactful. However, Gorbachev does. So when Gorbachev comes to power in 1985, he has some new thinking, and it's glasnost and perestroika. So glasnost means transparency. So in essence, the Soviet Union will become kind of more democratic, and there'll be greater freedoms in the press, and people can express themselves politically more openly. And perestroika is restructuring, and that means the restructuring of the economy. Now, my first thoughts when I've kind of analysed Gorbachev, like, is he seriously a communist? Did he genuinely believe in it? I think he recognised that the USSR was bankrupt by the late 1980s, and that they could no longer compete with America as a global superpower, and therefore he would need to accommodate and make some changes. Now, whilst this seems to be a huge mistake, if you look at a different country like China, where they did the same thing, it really worked, and still China has a communist government till today. So it wasn't a question of policy, but maybe the way it was carried out. Anyway, the main presidents he works with was really Ronald Reagan is the main president he works with, and then you've got Bush Senior as well. Now, the disasters for the Soviet Union which occurred in this period are the Chernobyl disaster. I mean, there's so many TV shows and documentaries about that. It really demonstrated how the USSR was financially bankrupt and couldn't afford to keep high-powered, like high technology nuclear stations, because they kept on cutting corners every term. So Chernobyl was really a man-made disaster because of the poor upkeep of that nuclear power station. We got the classic 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall. This happens really because of a policy by Gorbachev to denounce or renounce or cancel the Brezhnev Doctrine in 1987, which really gave a free hand to the peoples of Eastern Europe to escape that Soviet bloc of influence. You also have the collapse of the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union kind of goes out of a whimper rather than a bang. It's completely bankrupt, kind of like maybe intellectually, certainly financially, and it dissolves. Okay. So the major events of this new thinking are that there's a lot of summits and treaties which take place between Reagan and Gorbachev. It's important to note that Reagan, at the same time as doing kind of like diplomatic business with Gorbachev, he also kept the pressure on. So in 1987, Gorbachev heard Reagan made a very famous speech, "Tear down this wall." So this happened in 1987 in Berlin. So it's a very famous speech there. Now, that wall did fall down in 1989. Gorbachev no longer wanted to prop it up, or maybe felt that he had the power to do so. And in 1991, just before the fall of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact was dissolved. Now, I know you've only got one thing left on that slide, that Gorbachev resigns and the USSR collapses, but there's one more event, and that there was almost a hardline communist coup where some people in the Soviet Union who thought that the Soviet Union would collapse unless they returned to hardline communist rule, they tried to oust Gorbachev and force him to resign. However, the coup didn't have the support of some people in the army. People like Boris Yeltsin were particularly opposed to it, and Gorbachev himself would not resign. Now, because of this event, it really made the Soviet Union look very weak, and it collapsed under its own weight. And in 1991, that is the end of our course with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I'm going to put this video to an end there.